Hi, everybody. Bryan Norcross here with a Tuesday afternoon update on what's going on in the tropics because this situation or this potential system has the possibility, in fact, increasing likelihood, I think, of having an effect in South Florida beginning about Saturday and extending through the weekend. So it could be kind of disruptive over the weekend. We're not expecting any kind of strong storm, but it can still be annoying. And let me show you what is developing and what we think has a good chance of happening. So here's where we are right now. There's the X is where the National Hurricane Center nominally puts the center of this thing. So they're estimating it there this afternoon. There is no center of circulation at this point. So it's really just an estimate. And it's kind of unknown where it's going to be. And that has everything to do with what's going to happen in the future. You can see the European computer model has this broad quasi-looking center down to the south, but it's not a center of circulation. And also we see thunderstorms developing up here to the north. And sometimes the thunderstorms actually become the focus of where the center is. So there are a lot of possibilities here, which just adds tremendous uncertainty to what's going to happen downstream. So when we look at the wider view, we can see where the National Hurricane Center is predicting that it has a 60% chance of developing into at least a tropical depression. So you notice the 60% is in the next 7 days and a 0% in the next 2 days. And actually there's essentially a 0% in the next 3 days. We'd have to get up to about Saturday, I think, before there's any kind of reasonable chance. And even then, probably not a 60% chance. But in this zone somewhere that extends all the way up to the Carolinas and, of course, the Florida Peninsula and most of the Bahamas, somewhere in there, they're giving it a 60% chance of developing. A little better chance, I think, up in this part of it than down in this part of it. But we'll just see exactly what develops, because this has a lot to do with where this thing starts to get a center. Notice we have Puerto Rico here, Dominican Republic, with very tall mountains that can disrupt any system that tries to develop there. But if it were to develop offshore here somewhere and not be affected by those mountains, then there's very warm water, and if the upper level winds are conducive, it can develop pretty quickly. So a lot of variables here on a track that could be very close to or over the mountains. So let's take a look at what's going on right now. And the main thing you see is, look at the dust. This big cloud of dust here that is kind of wrapping around the system at this point. Question is, can it pull moisture into it and essentially dry out that dust? We see that this area down in here is a bit more moist, and we're seeing right on the edge of the dust, as often happens, we're seeing some thunderstorms try to develop, but then the dust kind of kills them off. So this is just in the very, very formative stages, and if it's going to develop into something, it has to gather enough moisture to get rid of that dust. Now, as it moves here closer to the islands in here and over in this area here, the water is at record warm temperatures. So the record warm water provides more energy, provides more moisture, so that might help it push away the dust, but still, there's a tremendous amount to move away. It's also a big circulation, so that's going to pull in dust from farther away. So we'll just have to see what happens. The computer forecast models kind of insist it's going to do that. When we look at what the European model is saying right now, we see there is this pocket of moisture kind of mixed in. The green is moisture. The browns are dust. So you see the lighter greens are kind of mixture of the dust and some moisture, but the model is showing kind of a concentration there. Well, that doesn't look especially like the satellite, so maybe the model is overdoing it. So again, all these uncertainties when you have this sort of system. As it moves forward to tomorrow, though, the system is going to move in the direction of the Caribbean islands, and the thinking is that it will gather moisture. So a kind of a moisture surge coming for the islands with some gusty winds. There's a lot of energy in this system. It's just that it's been very dry. But the impulse, think of the impulse of energy moving through the atmosphere, is really quite strong and quite large. So If it does gather moisture and get some thunderstorms, it could be strong tropical downpours with gusty winds moving into the islands tomorrow. Keep your eye up here in the upper left on the days here as we move forward in time. All right, now let's go to Thursday. Now the question is exactly where does this thing track in terms of the center of any energy? You see, the model has kind of a kink here, an increasing kink in the wind flow, indicating it's trying to form a circulation, but no circulation yet, according to the European model. But where is the kind of center of that energy? Is it here over those very tall mountains? Is it just to the north? Or maybe it's even farther north up in here, because we don't know really where all this is starting, so we don't know where it's going to be on Thursday. Whenever we have a kind of large amorphous system like this, there's just a whole lot of uncertainty involved, and the exact track makes a lot of difference on what happens downstream. All right, let's go forward now to Friday. The idea is it moves into the Bahamas. There's a general consensus in the computer models that the upper level winds will become more conducive for development starting about on Friday, and we see here a stronger kink in the winds, like an indication that it's trying to get organized. Now again, where is it? Is it over the mountains of eastern Cuba, or is it in the Bahamas, which the Bahamian Islands would have next to no effect on it at that point, and it could take advantage of the very warm water and the more conducive upper winds. So do we have just this disturbance, like a kink in the winds, or are we starting to get a circulation on Friday? More likely, when we get to Saturday, you see an even more extreme kink in the winds here. So the European model does not develop a depression. It has to be a full circulation to be a tropical depression. But when we get this strong a kink, that's an indication that a depression is coming. So we'll say for Saturday, gusty squalls, possibly a depression, coming in with the moisture coming into South Florida, or the southern part of the Florida Peninsula, and just beginning on Saturday and possibly continuing into the weekend. It really depends on where the core of the moisture is at that time, but we need to be ready for the possibility of a disruptive weather on Saturday. I don't see at this point any possibility of some kind of rapid intensification with a storm coming toward the southern peninsula of Florida. We always keep our mind open because over the Bahamas, there's a tremendous amount of warm water. We have the Gulf Stream there, a long history of systems intensifying. So you can't 100% rule it out, but there is no indication of a strong storm coming to South Florida. Just the increasing likelihood, I'd say, of disruptive weather in the southern peninsula about Saturday. Then we look forward in time, and boy, there's lots of possibilities, because it depends on where the system is and how strong it is. All indications are if it organizes relatively soon, it's more likely to track up to the east of Florida, maybe even not having a significant effect. If it takes a while, kind of like what we're seeing here, then it's more likely to go maybe along the coast of Florida and up toward the Carolinas. And indeed, we could have a stronger storm farther north if it stays over the Gulf Stream and has time to develop. So everybody in the Carolinas for early next week needs to stay in close touch. If it goes over the islands here and stays weak, there are computer forecast models that take it up into the Gulf, and then maybe we have to look next week up in the northern Gulf after it gets away from those islands and then maybe develops later. So lots of possibilities here, just starting with the moderate likelihood of some kind of disruptive weather in South Florida over the weekend, just as a first step in this process. But boy, there's just a lot of possibilities. Looking at the European, what are called ensembles, where since we don't know really where the center is going to develop, it sort of imagines it developing in different places and says, what would happen if it develops over here and it develops a little sooner and so forth. So these are only the stronger possibilities of the European system, not the ones that would just be a moisture surge or a depression and a fairly weak system of some kind. So here they are on Friday. So notice they're far away from the islands here. So these are the systems that did not get involved with the mountains. Now let's go forward in time. And what you see is on Saturday, they tend to move to the north, but some kind of lag behind here and some move faster. And the strongest ones stay well offshore of Florida. Then moving on to Sunday, you notice some lag behind and some go up here toward the Carolinas. Indeed, the stronger ones go up there. So there's just so much uncertainty here about all these possibilities. And these are only the stronger systems. The weaker systems are in here or they're over here, and they would be of less consequence in the Saturday-Sunday time frame. Maybe downstream next week, maybe some other issues may develop. Because what's happening here is we have this Bermuda high in the Atlantic, as we usually do. We have a heat dome, as you may know, a lot of heat in the center of the country. So there's a channel between them. And if you remember Hurricane Beryl early in July, when it got up near Texas, it was going up between a heat dome and another high pressure system. And exactly how that channel works out is always iffy. And until we get a system developed and understand better exactly how those dynamics are going to play out, and maybe even we'll get a cone and so forth once the system starts to develop, probably that's not going to happen, though, until closer to the end of the week. So the factors that favor development in all this, one is a very vigorous disturbance, a lot of energy moving in toward the islands. Do the upper level winds indeed become conducive, as a number of the hurricane forecast models say, around the Bahamas and the South Florida area in general is where that generally starts. So we're talking the Friday, Saturday time frame, and there's extremely warm water, record warm water near the Caribbean islands. That's why it's been so just incredibly hot in those islands this summer. Now, the factors against development is all that Saharan dust. It has to push that away if it's going to develop a core and a circulation. Very large size, so that takes time to pull it together. Normally, you have to add some days to it. We're talking about 3 days now until we get to Friday, and possible land interaction. Of course, as I said, if it tries to form over those islands, that's going to delay everything. So we have those factors. And then there's one more, and that is that in the Pacific, these systems are really trying to develop out here. And when the Pacific gets busy, the Eastern Pacific, usually the Atlantic doesn't have that same forcing. And this is usually a precursor. The pulse that moves along around the Earth comes to the Eastern Pacific first and then eventually gets to the Atlantic. And indeed, the forecast for that positive influence in the Atlantic for development is forecast to come along toward the middle of August, not here in the very beginning of August. So we'll see. This is a bit of a negative factor at this point, at least it looks that so far, although obviously the Gulf of Mexico is not far away from where this apparent positive influence from the general atmospheric circulation is right now. So that's where we stand. We're going to be talking about this all week. All I really urge you at this point is to stay informed, especially later in the week when we see exactly how all this comes together, how the steering comes together, and we'll see if it really does try and form some kind of a circulation. All right. Have a good evening. See you tomorrow.